It's gone, I think. Yeah.
Unfortunately connected to places that have similar socioeconomic.
I didn't go to the meeting.
I will call this meeting to order at 5:01 on Thursday, February 22nd, 2020. Planning Commission in the Rockbridge County Administrative Offices. We have all but one commissioner in attendance, Mary Stuart Harlow, not here this evening. Have we all had a chance to look at the agenda and any thoughts on it?
It looks good.
It looks good. Okay, so
Yeah, I move
Aye.
approval.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Oh, I forgot to say aye. Aye. Approval of the minutes from the February 8th, 2024 meeting. As ever, excellent summary of often convoluted conversations. Any thoughts on any corrections, additions, subtractions, modifications of it?
Since I like Kate's minutes so much, I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, we will move on to citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda are now open. And closed as no one is coming forward. So we will move on to our first order of new business, which is new business A, which is our annual zoning ordinance amendments 2024-01. This is our so-called batch A. We're here for final review of this. This is not a hearing on these matters yet. This is the final review, right? So that we can advertise it. So Arnie will start us with a staff report.
That's correct. You have gone through a number of different proposed amendments. You've batched them. Most of them are in batch A, and I think we have 4, if I remember correctly, in batch B. So we wanted to bring it back to you because you have made amendments to some of the language proposed here. So just one final review for you to go through that. Happy to answer any questions. I don't really have anything else prepared other than that. What the next step would be, as Pat's already mentioned, is if you approve it, then we can go ahead and advertise it for a public hearing, perhaps in the second meeting in March. And these fairly simple and straightforward. I don't really expect that much interest in them, but we could have some interest. So the next step would be to put these all together, advertise the public hearing, and hold that public hearing.
Any questions for Arnie on this?
Are we going to go back through them and just say yes to each one? Is that the?
However you would like to handle it. We've just provided it for you. You've seen it. You've previously you made comments, but if you want to go through them individually, we certainly can.
There were just a few that I had last
Right.
questions about.
Okay, so then we will get to that on the after public comment if there are not any other questions for Arnie. Okay, so public comment. And none, and so we should then go through and say which are there any of these I think is it 16 items that to see if they have turned out the way we had talked about them in our discussion. So Shannon, you can kick it off.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my first question is actually on item number 6, amend sign tables for C1 and C2 districts. And it's really not about what is in the red, but rather some of the regulations where the area and the height difference are bigger for the C1 zoning than C2. And I just wanted to make sure that that was the way it was supposed to be.
It
Yes.
is because in the C2 zoning district, you're presumably on the suburban area where the buildings are typically further away from the street, and therefore larger signage is typically allowed in that suburban style commercial district than it is in the downtown.
Right. And that's why I was wondering why you would have a bigger area in C1.
And which in particular?
So I'm looking at projecting signs. It looks like the C2 has a limit of 12 feet. Sorry, C1 has 15 square feet per side.
Two things to mention there. First, we're not changing anything. So this is the original language. So
Okay.
that's not what's part of the amendment.
Yeah,
but
that's what I was saying.
to answer the question is, and I can only presume this is true, since it's been a while since these amendments were made. I think this was all updated for the signage in the 2016-2017 update. But I would reason that you don't need as big of a projecting sign if you're already on the sidewalk in front of a strip center than you are if you're walking down Main Street and you're not far enough away from the building to see the wall sign, and the projecting sign that's coming over top of the sidewalk is what's helping you to find that location.
Thank you. Okay, so my next one is item 8. In the new language, there's just an extra word. So it reads, whenever there are guests on the property, the owner of a bed and breakfast establishment must reside on the property, or alternatively, the owner may, and I don't think you need the word also, may live on an immediate adjacent parcel.
Okay.
Because you're not going to both live in it and somewhere else. That's perhaps quibbling, though.
Now is the time to quibble.
Indeed. Everybody okay with that particular
Yeah,
adjustment?
I think that's good.
Okay, so the next one is item 12. Are chickens by right in parks and open space?
They, the way the chickens are is that they are allowed per, I'm gonna say it hopefully correctly, the single family or per house or per, where's my note? Keeping of chickens an accessory use to a single family, two family, or multifamily dwelling. I'm sorry, I'm now on page 28
Yep.
in red, that note. And it is possible that we would have a house in a parks and open space zoning district.
Okay,
That just is a leftover. I cannot think of one off the top of my head, but it is possible that that has occurred.
okay, and how about so it seems like it's single family. Okay, to those dwellings. So do we have any dwellings in C2, C1?
Oh, yeah,
Okay, so, but it has to be with a dwelling.
correct.
Okay.
As an example, you turn off of East Nelson Street at the bank, at the KFC, and you head up the hill. There are 3 or 4 houses on your right-hand side, single-family detached homes that are in the C2 zoning
Okay.
district, just as an example. And we didn't want to preclude somebody just because they were in a commercial district or the floodplain or anything else from keeping chickens if they wanted to keep
Okay,
chickens.
I just wanted to make sure that
It's awkward.
that
the
I
way it's
understood.
Filled in the use matrix, I admit that, but that is sort of how we allowed chickens.
And I know that was a lengthy project, getting chickens on the docket. Okay, so the next one is item 14, page 34. So I just have a word suggestion, I guess this is. So we've got vehicle fueling stations, which is fine. And then we also have electric vehicle charging stations. And so the first one is a property, and the second one is a outlet, like a dock or a port. And I just think it might be a little confusing. And I was wondering if we might possibly call an electric vehicle charging either point or dock, which is apparently industry standard.
We had this exact same conversation after your last conversation, so how to put it in here. And I'm not going to be able to remember everything, but I did try, we had a couple of resources that were laid out for how, I think one was a American Planning Association, and we found something else. But I could not resolve exactly what you're talking about. I could not resolve this charging post or charger, trying to figure out how to put that in. But then we had to change too many definitions to make that work. So, and I'm not doing a great job of explaining because I can't remember exactly why, but we came back to the electric vehicle charging station, even though we have station in both,
Yeah.
where you're right, vehicle fueling station is that bigger thing that allows everything. But the electric vehicle charging station, even though it sounds like station, it's a bigger thing. It's not. It's just, as you're pointing out, more of that charger that could be only supplying the ability to charge one car at one particular parking space.
Right.
So it was just a word usage, and I'm not explaining it well, but we tried to look at that, but it just didn't work out well with other definitions and what these things are generally called.
So what other definitions are since electric vehicle charging, whatever it is new?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, where else does it need to be changed? You said it needed to be changed in a number of different places, or was it just that you couldn't decide on?
No, I guess what the references that I was looking at, trying to figure out what's the best thing to call this
Mhm.
electric vehicle charging station, that is an electric vehicle charging equipment. So there were a number of different definitions. None of it's really standardized that much as of yet. And again, I'm not doing a great job because I'm just not remembering why I had to come back to electric vehicle charging station.
You all had wanted to put the two different definitions together. And we were realizing it made sense during the meeting, and then when
Yeah.
we came back to it, we were realizing we were gonna have trouble doing that.
Thank you for pointing that out because I've forgotten that point. So we thought we could combine it into one thing, but then I realized we needed to have something separate for that instance where you have an on-street parking space or a parking space in a city-owned parking lot where there is a charger there just for that, but it's not the whole vehicle fueling station
Yeah.
with all the others. So, and then I also tried to get away from the word station, but that seemed to be the typical language.
Yeah.
So that's why, and thank you for reminding me, because we were actually trying to, at your last meeting, get to one definition for all this, and it just
Right.
didn't work. Because we thought we could combine what we had previously into one, and
So I looked up on, the interweb, and it called them charging points and charging docks as a single. It just seems like that might.
And the other thing that may have been part of this is that, yes, you can have a charger or a dock with two ports or whatever they're called. But I think the benefit for the station is it's not just the equipment, but it's also the parking space. It's also the space that goes along with it. So the way we have an electric vehicle charging station, an off-street or on-street parking space that has equipment installed for the purpose of charging the battery. So it's not just the equipment, it's the equipment and the space.
Okay, that makes sense, actually.
It does. I mean, I see your point too, though. I don't know if there's a solution, and I won't belabor the issue, but it confused me when we were talking about it last time. I mean, in the first definition of vehicle fueling station, like, is an establishment. So then when I'm looking at the second definition, I'm like expecting it to be an establishment.
Mm-hmm.
But now I understand that what you really mean there is, like, say somebody's got a parking lot and they have the machinery to supply electricity to an electric car, right? But in other words, this is meant precisely to include such facilities that are not part of vehicle fueling stations, correct? That's why we need to have them both in there, and that's why we can't combine the two things,
Residential.
including in residential. Yeah. Yeah. I think the definitions, understanding that, the definitions themselves seem pretty clear, actually.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yes,
So does that
agreed.
Include the parking.
we're just so used to hearing gas station and thinking of a
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
So,
And then also just to remind that this is really a stopgap measure
Yeah,
before we
yeah.
went whole hog into what we think or what may be everything that we need to have in our zoning ordinance for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Right.
So with this right now, looking at the table, does it allow you to have a electric vehicle charging station in a residential area?
No, we could certainly put it in as a separate use, but we
Yeah.
could also simply consider it to be an accessory use to, as we have, because one has already gone in. So that's not a major use. In other words, it could easily be considered, and we'll get into this with concessions and whatnot, but, so your primary use in a residential is your house. So that's the main use, and your shed is an accessory, your parking space is an accessory, and this small electric fueling, this dock thing or station, as we're calling it, is an accessory. But
Okay.
do we want to explicitly call that out?
So
Is it different?
So
than
it would
calling
be in
out
the-
chickens?
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
flipping over to design standards.
Yeah.
So in the parking, that's how we tried to address this. In off-street parking, so this is in article or section 12, design standards, adding in electric vehicle charging stations. Any off-street space that meet the minimum requirements of this article may also include a charging station for electric vehicles. Such stations may be reserved for electric vehicles, may also count toward the minimum off-street parking requirements. And that's the section, that parking section applies to all your zoning districts.
Oh, that's in the park. Okay.
Parking,
okay.
yeah,
All right.
that's how we sort of patched something in that would allow this station charger port thing to go, be allowed everywhere.
Okay. That sounds good.
And
Good.
that's
So
it
that's it?
for me. Yep.
Okay.
Did have, oh,
All right, but first, John Eastwood, I just want to take issue with one of your comments that if you're not willing to belabor a point, I don't know what you're doing here. I don't even know why you're here. So don't worry, you don't have to
Yeah.
preface with that. It's a given,
Okay, thank you.
okay?
Duly
As
noted.
Chair, I will just pass that.
Okay.
Okay, other John. Less recent.
well, with
John.
that set up,
Yeah, right, go for it, John.
I'm going to belabor a point that I raised the last time, and it's not one that I will hang my hat on. Remember, we talked about, we are saying here, an establishment engaged in the retail sale of vehicle that is stored primarily on site. So then we had the problem, the electricity is not stored on site. So yes, it's Arnie.
We inserted the word primarily because of that comment.
Okay,
Primarily wasn't in there, and that
then
was our
takes care of it.
easiest fix.
Okay, because I was going to suggest
Hopefully
that
it's
we could
sufficiently easy.
add, and that is stored and dispensed on site, but then
Uh-huh.
that might get into another.
To be stored and or dispensed. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
Oh, I like that.
dispensed.
That would solve it, right?
okay,
That's good.
that's it. I'm not belaboring it. That's.
I was kind of weak,
There's
John.
and or dispensed.
Right, will that work? I don't, make
Yeah.
sure that's not,
Does it need the word primarily then?
Yeah, that's good. Do you think that's good?
That is stored.
So is everybody
Or dispensed.
general
Yeah.
agreement
good?
there?
we good with that?
Now, I'll say that
word and
And
Yeah,
or
you want to read it,
dispense.
Arnie? How it'll
Yeah.
sound?
an establishment engaged in the retail sale of motor vehicle fuel that is stored and or dispensed on site, such as,
okay.
Yeah, take out primarily and put and or. Dispensed.
just to reiterate, this is how we can, if you're okay with that, this is how it will go forward in the advertisement, but you have the ability, based on comments at the public hearing, to tweak it further. So this isn't the end
Yeah.
all.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
I
all
may
right.
belabor one.
Yeah, it's good.
Item number 4, the
Four.
specialty food shop.
That's the number
So it's
4.
looking pretty good. Still. So why no open flame? Are there different building standards for an open flame? Sorry, this is on, I apologize. This is on page 11 and 12. Back to the, we got into what's cooking on the specialty food shop, and I think it's looking pretty good. But I couldn't. it basically is no frying or
I think
open
that's
flame.
I
And
think that's the way it is now. I gotta
Yeah.
make sure that we're not adding that. That's the way specialty food existed.
it is,
But
yes.
The
right.
idea is just, this is a lower level, lower impact specialty food thing where you're not frying. Because at some point, if you do all the cooking, then you're getting to the regular restaurant. Is that the point?
Well,
That's the
yeah,
question?
and because, and I say that because we are making it conditional use in RLC and all the others are by right anyway, in C1 and C2, why not give them a little room? Because again, we go back to, we don't allow takeaway places right now in C1, C2. So this may be kind of our little in to take away if it's a very specialty kind of.
So,
place.
yeah, and that's, I guess, open for discussion, since the only real issue is RLC conditional use. You have control over a conditional use permit. Do you want to take away the prohibition of about open flame heat source being utilized in a specialty food shop? Because you know that you have that conditional use permit sort of protection, because somebody will have to come before you for that.
And so what does that mean? So no broiling?
No gas.
Yeah.
For me, it's no gas, nothing on a wok, nothing on a fryer would be presumably heated by gas,
Yeah.
as would a flat top grill, all those things. So all that intensive cooking.
Right.
If we were to have an actual bakery shop, what would that be considered a specialty?
Like,
You know, like baking bread and
well, up to now, no, because presumably you're gonna bake the bread with an open flame heat source, unless somebody knows better than me what
Yeah.
a commercial oven would have. And it wouldn't be a specialty food shop because of number 2, the way number 2 currently is written.
Right, it's just heating food.
Mhm.
Heating food is supposed to cooking food.
So we don't allow bakeries.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean,
Not as a specialty food shop as it's currently written, but as it's revised, yes, I think
Right.
so.
Yeah. So currently right now with our,
Not as a specialty food shop. So the bakery would be would be something else potentially in our code. And I'd have to go back and look at all
Okay.
our other definitions to see if it fits somewhere else. But I don't think the way it's currently written in our code now that it would be a specialty food shop.
yeah, and I don't think if it's restaurant either. That's why I was
Yeah.
wondering. I
Yeah.
don't think we allow it technically, which would be nice to make the specialty food shop kind of fit. Just my
Yeah.
personal thought.
Yeah.
That's
kinda
another idea.
Fit some of those kind of things that we do want and RLC's protected through the conditional use permit.
So with the,
Uh,
I guess, item for you to consider is, do you want to remove number 3 at this time for the reasons that we just went through?
Well, and then do you need 2?
Mm.
So, wow, this is not to that point, but I do have another question about number 2. Which I can say now, or we should.
Yeah, go ahead, say it. Yeah, go ahead.
So the way it reads, the application of heat by microwave oven, convection oven, or range, or the boiling of water for beverages. I think you could construe that to read that all of that for beverages as opposed to food.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just read it that way and then I was like, let's just make sure. Maybe that's a question for John Eastwood.
Me? Oh, me? Oh,
Give you a chance to
belabor it.
to belabor.
I think strictly the commas deal with it, but it is also not clear to me that, like, do we need to preclude boiling of water for other, like, do we need the 4 beverages there?
Right.
Like, is there a type of boiling that we're trying to prohibit? Or could we avoid all possible confusion? by-
do we need any of that though? But so if we go with the definition that where it's the primary client consumption is offsite with limited seating and the product is limited to one type or line of food service. And the food preparation is such that all odors must be contained within the establishment. And just leave it at that. Do we have to say anything about how it's prepared?
Right. What would we not want them to do?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe frying, but if you're in C1, C2, I don't care if you fry.
How about RLC?
Well,
But
that's,
that's conditional, right?
yeah,
We spent a lot of time on this one.
right.
Is that like, therefore we should keep it?
No, just, it's,
Well, and part of the reason is because I think we're trying to fix another, or at least I'm trying to fix another problem that we have that we saw.
Well, does someone want to suggest something? What would you think? And Leslie, you brought this up. What do you think?
Yeah,
would be-
I
what
would
be
strike
your idea.
2, 3, and just finish that last sentence with number 1. You don't even
Yeah.
have to number it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So is that a motion?
And then make it a by right in RLC?
No, no,
Oh.
conditional.
No
You think that-
conditional in RLC.
Conditional.
Okay.
Yeah, am I missing something? Or is there something, that we don't want?
Right.
I mean, I think part of why it got to that possibly is everybody worried about fast food downtown.
Hmm.
And that's not really gonna happen because we don't allow drive-throughs. Or we're limited on what you can do with a drive-through downtown.
Right.
I mean, that was the only reason I could think of that we kind of
Yeah.
got so specific on.
And odor, I guess frying will produce
Yeah,
more
right.
odor, but
So
So
maybe,
what are you saying? Who said it?
Leslie.
Scratch 2 and 3 and just have 1?
Yeah, but then one will become part of the last sentence on the definition above.
so maybe actually saying that you can't deep fry. I mean, if that's, is there a scenario where we don't want deep fried food in a specialty food shop? Like no specialty fry shops?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That may help if somebody's considering something and they don't want to, they know up, if that's something you don't want, you list it and then they don't even come into the conditional use permit process because they know that frying or whatever it is not something that's allowed.
Yeah, and we probably don't want that in RLC.
Right.
Barbecue places don't have fries, do they?
no, that's
Yeah,
right.
right. And that was part of the issue is I can definitely see where frying is not good for RLC. Do we care in R1 or C1 and C2?
the second part, and specialized equipment may be required to contain the odors. So what? That doesn't mean that no, it has to be contained within can't be exported outside.
I think the metric for that was if somebody can stand on the property line and smell whatever it is, then they're not meeting their standard.
Which they always say those vents contain the odors, but I'm right behind Evans Hall and I can tell every time they're frying onions in there.
So do we want to, would it seem odd to be singling out deep frying or frying? Is that, would we want to just take out number 2 and add no deep frying of food? Is that,
Does that make it hard to deny a permit in RLC then if they are? Is there any way we can kind of lay the groundwork where that's a reasonable consideration for RLC?
Hmm.
I'm sorry, not following that in the sense that if you say no deep frying and somebody comes in with a fryer, do you still have the ability to
Well,
allow it?
The kind of the opposite. If we don't say no deep frying, but
Yeah.
then the people feel like we shouldn't allow it in RLC and is there any way we can word it to allow it in C1, C2, but not RLC?
I think if we go to the definitions of restaurant, whatever's being fried will fit the definition of restaurant, but that
Okay.
doesn't,
Yeah.
but your takeout, takeaway part is
Yeah.
lost in that.
Maybe
I guess my only response to that would be, if you know you don't want frying, just go ahead and say it up front so that somebody doesn't apply for it and then you're generally against frying. Just go ahead and state that up front. But if you're thinking that there may be a situation where frying could potentially, and that we don't have to come up with all the scenarios now,
Right.
then maybe don't put it in that there's a prohibition.
let's say no frying. Keep the 1, 2 is no frying.
I would agree with that.
Does that sound good down on this end?
Yeah, because even if you did have frying and then it's supposed to be contained within the shop, it's gonna be kind of not a very welcome thing to, so I would say just say no frying.
Okay.
Frying or deep frying?
Both.
Both? No
I'm
frying
just
or
thinking of
or
this-
deep frying,
The
because they're
odor-
different.
I don't
Yeah.
know, the odor, again, are we saying that
Wait,
if they,
what is the deep frying in the oil?
Mhm.
That's what I was thinking was deep frying.
Right. And frying would just be, like in a frying pan.
A
Yeah.
wok or something. Good
Sure.
fried rice. But I would say
I'm
deep
just
But
frying.
saying, but you
but it-
still have the odor that is gonna be contained within that building or that shop. I wouldn't like it.
Although I think you can get the odors from all sorts of things, stick,
Yes.
who knows what in your microwave, and boy, that can be problematic.
Well, we
Arnie?
just put in no deep frying. We'll try to do a little research to figure out what kitchen appliances do or don't do. And
Yeah.
again, you have and then you can mull this over between now and the public hearing. And even at the public hearing, you have the ability to change this more if you like.
Okay.
That sounds
I've been instructed by our chair to belabor
Okay.
points. So
please
Yeah.
do.
Okay.
I think I'm coming down and I'm comfortable with this as a way to proceed at the moment, but I'm very much of the same mind as what I understood Leslie to be saying, which I think there's like two things going on here. There's do you have to be sitting there to eat the food? And then there's the how are they cooking the food? And I think what you were saying, right, is we're not worried about there being places where you could take away fried food in C1 or C2. It's the RLC where there's the conditional use, right?
Mhm.
Right, where we might be concerned about the frying part of it.
Right.
Right, so I thought you were asking, how do we get the ability to have takeaway food in RLC with a conditional use permit, but where we still have grounds to not offer conditional use permit if somebody's going to be frying, right?
Right.
But being comfortable with frying being by right for specialty food shops in C1 or C2.
Right.
That's
That's what
what
I
you
was
meant,
trying to
right?
get at,
Yeah.
but
Seems
I
like
don't-
there ought to be a way to achieve that, right? Where, like,
words, maybe that's the words.
yeah.
No.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, that is what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I
that-
think I understood that. I thought you were clearer than my restatement of it was.
I don't think so.
So like, because it just seems like what we want to be sure to be able to do is to not have frying in RLC. I don't fully know the backstory or why that is actually. So, but we don't actually have any objection, do we, to that happening in C1 or C2? We just want to be able to
No.
reject conditional use permit applications and
And
see on this basis.
we allow deep frying in
Restaurants, yeah.
restaurants
Yeah.
in C1 and C2.
Yeah.
Already, correct?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so how,
And in RLC. In RLC.
and in RLC, right? But I'm just thinking about where we're okay with frying, with deep frying. It's already allowed in restaurants. So the real issue is the takeaway. Is being able to take away whatever deep fried item you have obtained and eating it offsite. And yeah,
And I think we're getting hung up on the donut shop, but part of the donut shop was even not so much the frying as the hours. I, I, I personally thought, and I don't know if the rest of you who were here for that, because they were going to start at 2 a.m.
Why?
start cooking. So getting back to what you're saying, is it really so much the frying, or was that just that whole situation, the way it was set up in a neighborhood wasn't right?
Well, it was both. It was, as you said, the frying, starting cooking at 2 a.m. And then the other issue that we had was parking.
Right.
That was another
Yeah.
one, so. But Leslie, can you go back to say why you wanted to change this? I might have missed that.
The specialty foods?
Yeah, no, I mean.
why take out number
Why
two?
take out-
2 and 3?
Well, I'm not really sure why we're limiting the cooking.
I'm just trying to understand. Okay.
I mean, we could make the specialty food shop a conditional on RLC.
Yeah.
Which will allow us to take these sorts of things into effect, or was there a reason why we needed it to be by right in RLC?
That's the proposal already is
Mhm.
especially food shop, as you see on the bottom use matrix on the bottom of page
Yeah.
12, where
Mhm.
it's already changed to a C for conditional.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the part of what you were asking about there is like, would then rejecting conditional use permit applications in RLC on the basis of frying appear arbitrary
Right.
if there's essentially no,
Oh, I was looking at the wrong thing.
right? Is that,
That is exactly right.
yeah,
And I'm
that-
trying to think, would we really do it just for the donut shop? There were multiple things. There was
See.
like at least 3 things: the time, the parking, the frying. Would we always be objecting to frying in RLC? Like, I don't know if the barbecue place, I don't recall them serving French fries. Beam me up,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That doesn't seem to be a problem.
Going
there.
back to your previous logic, if you take out 2 and 3 and 1 is enforced, then.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you could, if I had a small fryer, I could run it, but if it's not to the scale that
Mhm.
that I need an exhaust fan for it, then it would be okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so so no,
So,
So now I'm kind of going back to where I started.
yeah, I'm with you there. So,
So get rid of 2 and 3 and,
yeah, let's do that.
okay.
Yep.
Boy, that was belaboring at its
Okay,
best.
very good. Well,
So it sounds like we have a proposal
yes,
to take out so delete, I don't want to use the takeout word. To delete 2 and 3
Yeah.
and add 1 into the first sentence for the
Yes.
definition for
Yeah.
specialty food shop.
yes, yes,
Yes.
and keep the conditional
So-
use.
yes.
Yeah.
So that will get the amended and put into the batch A advertisement.
Do you need a motion in a second?
I don't think so.
Now, we're kind of loose in this point. If we were at the point where we're actually at the public hearing, then yes, but this is just to get us there.
Great.
All right then, we're good on that. Good on our batches, batch A. Ready to type those up and send them out for public hearing notice. Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna move on to new business B, which is our annual zoning ordinance text amendment batch B 2024-02 concessions and mobile restaurants. And that's gonna pick up on
37.
page 37, and Arnie's going to frame this for us.
Okay, for batch B, we're going to start with concessions and then just for priorities that were set last time, cottage housing, entrance quarter, quick review, and then mini warehouses. So concessions are first for batch B. Typically, I don't want to provide you something different than what you've seen before. I don't want to amend it. So the first 2.5 pages are what was provided to you previously in the staff packets. And then over on page 39, that line And then for discussion on this date, that's what's sort of new. But just to go back quickly through, initially this was brought forward because Raro mentioned that they wanted to make improvements. I think it was the concession stand. They asked nicely, can we do that? And I went back to the code quickly and found that concession stand is not something that's specifically allowed in the parks, in the parks and open space, or specifically for a public park and recreational area, to be specific. So then the question is, do we need to amend something to specifically allow a concession stand? And then ancillary to that was also food trucks. We've had in Brubaker and probably in other public parks, not just downtown proper, events and food trucks. And so it's a two-part question about concession stands and also about mobile restaurants, because we're so fancy, food trucks are called mobile restaurants here. And to be clear, a mobile restaurant is a food truck, food trailer, or food cart specifically. So that was the sort of the impetus for this. And then on page 38, provided you with the use matrix section for public assemblies and public park and recreational area, and for public recreation area. In section 11 there in the middle of the page, a couple of use and design standards, and also the definitions. And I think we're probably going to trip over a little bit what's a public park and recreational area, what's a public recreation assembly. And the reason I added included the definition here for public assembly and underline incidental sales, thinking that that may be one way of making a concession stand an incidental sale, and therefore an accessory use basically to whatever the primary use is, which would be the public park and recreational area. So that's what was provided previously. You can strike my staff recommendation because I think we're going to go in a slightly different direction. And also planning commission recommendation, just you held and decided on the 25th of January to put this one aside as a batch B, and there's some excerpted minutes from that meeting if they're helpful. So for batch B and concessions and now mobile restaurants in city parks, how do we want to address, if at all, concessions and or food trucks? And the more I think about the concessions and the limitations of where they can go, we may not need to address concessions. But in preparation for the meeting, and I forgot to hand these out.
We're in the pack.
We got a big one.
Yeah, that's great. I love it.
Where?
Thank you very much.
Do I have it?
It's a fold out.
And
Oh, oh,
That nice.
thank you.
also have the mobile restaurant. 2011.3.
Yes.
Yeah.
We surprise ourselves
You're on
sometimes.
Kate.
So those two things might be helpful just as background. So when we're discussing concessions and where are parks and open space zone properties. So I thought it'd be helpful on the map to show you, because we don't always have the map with us. We don't always pull it up on the screen. So if you look at all the green colored properties that are within the city, all of those are parks owned by the city with one exception. A limited number of golf holes of the Lexington Golf and Country Club are in the city. And that's on the far east side of the map. Sorry, other side, far west side of the map. You'll see the Lexington Golf and Country Club, and there are 4 or 5 golf holes there that are in the city. The rest of them are out. But everything else is owned by the city. So then I started thinking, well, where else would we possibly even want to construct a concession stand? And thought, well, where you have the most activity could potentially be in Jordan's Point Park, but that's a flood zone. So we're not building anything permanent in Jordan's Point Park because we have flood zone issues and specific requirements for building there. Oh,
Would that apply to a concession stand? Because it's pretty much a shack. And even a lot of the equipment, I know at the high school, will unplug and put away.
the structure itself could potentially be built in such a way that it could be allowed. But once you build in a floodplain, you have specific standards.
Okay.
I'm a little bit more used to coastal areas where if you're in a V zone, a velocity zone, you have to build with breakaway walls. That doesn't really make sense for a concession stand. So you couldn't really build in a floodway. Part of that park is in a floodway and the rest of it's in a floodplain. So you can build, but then it's going to be a more expensive construction. And then I'm not so sure we would be building it down in the lower part of the park anyway, where the soccer field is, and the other, maybe it would be in the upper portion of the park. And I don't remember where the pavilion happens to be with the bathroom in Jordan's Point Park. And I can't remember if that's in the flood zone or not. But other than that, I'm not really thinking of any other places that we would potentially be building a concession stand. And then the other part to mention is the concession stand really could be an accessory use and therefore allowed anyway, if we wanted to. And to sort of describe that a little bit, because we don't always talk about accessory dwelling units, but accessory uses in the sense that our code isn't really laid out like some other zoning ordinances where there's a list of by right uses, there's a list of conditional uses, and then they really go through and specifically list out accessory uses. Ours isn't that specific on the accessory side, so that's left up to interpretation a bit. But I think it would be easy to interpret if the city wanted to put in a concession stand at Jordan's Point Park, that would be an accessory use to the park, even if it wasn't specifically spelled out like what we think we might be doing to explicitly allow it one way or another. So having said all that, I'm sort of talking myself out of perhaps a need to even address concessions in either the parks and open space or as a definition change to public park and recreational area.
So sorry, how would that look in the ordinance then, or how,
I'm talking myself out of making a change in the ordinance.
right?
In other words, if you were comfortable with saying it's just an accessory use and we own all the parks and open space property anyway, then do we really need to say specifically that a concession stand is allowed in the parks and open space or specifically for the public park and recreational area use?
Oh,
But if you still wanted to go forward, there are two options there, and I'm now on page 40 under the concessions heading. So if it is determined that there's a need to expressly permit concessions in the public park and recreational area use, which is a by right use in parks and open space, you could either, first one there, amend the public park and recreational area definition to allow incidental sales. And this approach may benefit from a statement that incidental sales are distinct from mobile restaurants, just to make a distinction between the two. So again, you could go into the definition and just say incidental sales, and the concessions would be incidental to whatever other activities occurring in the park. Another option is to create, and this is sort of the whole enchilada version, where you create a new use, a concessions use with a definition and a placement in the matrix, and possibly developing use and design standards.
What's the simplest approach?
Not doing anything.
yeah, and it really will only be.
To review that is Raro said, hey, can we use a concession stand? And I thought, okay, let's see if it's in the zoning ordinance at all. And it's not specifically explicitly allowed as a use. So then I had to think, okay, is it allowed? Isn't it allowed? Well, it's at a minimum, it's a grandfathered use. It's a legal non-conforming use. So that shouldn't be an issue. It can continue. So we're not trying to deny Raro the use of the concession stand that already exists in Brubaker. But then it could also be considered an accessory use. So an accessory use that's clearly incidental to all the other activities in the park. And concession stand only occurs when there are activities in the park. It's not set up as a restaurant at any other time. So that's sort of how I got to this question of a concessions, just because the question came up. Then I thought, do we need to address it? And the more consideration there is, thinking maybe we don't need to address it because of all the other reasons I already mentioned. We own all the parks and open space property where this is a by right use anyway. We could easily, in my opinion, consider a concession stand to be an accessory use to the public park and recreational area use.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Anybody else want to belabor that?
You sure?
Then what does that lead? So is the idea of the mobile restaurants, the food trucks, is that a whole different
It's
issue?
a separate one that we haven't,
Okay.
I haven't gotten to yet, so
Okay.
I'm trying
So
to.
so I think your point that this building a permanent structure only applies to the one that's already there. And it's good to go one way or the other.
And same for the pool. So
And the one at the pool, right? Right.
I haven't been to the pool, so I didn't realize there was.
Yeah, there's a
stand there.
concession stand at the pool too.
Yeah.
And if,
So
just
just-
say if the indoor pool wanted to build a concession stand. Same thing, we own it, so it's an accessory use. so it's
Accessory.
fine.
Is this right? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's not gonna mess with anybody and inconvenience or create problems, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
Okay.
show that.
We'll shelve that one in food trucks or mobile restaurants. Again, since we're fancy. Mobile restaurants are currently a by right use in RLC C1 and C2. And on our use and design standards, so the little supplement that you've received, one thing I want to point out in that first paragraph, the following additional requirements apply to sales from a mobile restaurant operating on private property or within public spaces or rights of way. So we do allow a mobile restaurant, a food truck to come into the city, get a license, have an inspection done, and they can operate on city property, on the city street, or if they're on a private property that is zoned commercial, they have to at least get a letter of approval from the property owner. They can't just set up. We want them at least to have approval. But we did have this exception. So except when operating in conjunction with temporary special events permitted under applicable sections of the city code. When we were developing the use and design standards for food trucks, we thought, hey, what happens when we have the community festival or Rock the Bridge or something else? We really don't want all these additional restrictions on them and the time that they set up, how long they can be open, because that's already an event that's gone through the process of a special event permit, or it's at least gone to Public Works. Public Works is the entity that reserves and schedules the different parks that we have. So we did have an exception written into all the use and design standards you see here for those special events. And then I'm not going to get into any of the other use and design standards at this point unless there are questions on.
I do have a question. Can you explain? So I'm concerned on page 43 by item P as in Paul. Because basically it looks like what it says is the requirements of this section shall not apply to mobile restaurant vendors at catered events. And that's pretty much a period, which means all of these. So if I'm having a party or something at a catered event, then I can do any of this. I don't have to have trash receptacles. I can discharge liquid wastes. I can do anything that would be really a nuisance. So I just
We
wonder
would hope
if
you
that's
wouldn't
really
on
what
your
we
own
mean.
property. But the reason that is in there is there was a realization that if you wanted for your child's birthday party to get the taco truck or the taco cart guy there, that you wouldn't be limited to the hours of operation, all the other things that are here. We would hope as a good steward of your own property and the city's property that you or the vendor wouldn't dump liquid wastes.
It just seems very broad. That seems like given how many regulations there are, it just seems it seems like a big loophole to me. I mean, I can see how some of them might not apply, but some of them seem like they would have to apply.
And I was hoping maybe not to rewrite this whole section,
Yeah,
just to
And
figure out how.
and we don't have to,
food
we don't have,
be-
this may be one of those things that we put off until next year. put into batch, whatever the batch is for next year. That just seems like
That's true. That's a good
a
point.
big loophole to me.
That's not come up before, because again, we were just trying to make an allowance for that catered event so that it wouldn't get pulled. So someone who's a vendor that has a food truck, trailer, or cart could actually go, and we were thinking more about point of sale. So if you hire me to cater your child's event and I'm the taco guy, I'm not charging each person. You've already paid for me. So we wanted to set that aside separate from what is typically a food truck, trailer, cart operating on public property or even private property where you're having individual sales. So we clearly didn't think.
But I mean, that
As
they wouldn't have to have
detailed.
a business license. They
To play a lot of music.
Well, there are other things. They
Wouldn't
will,
have to
if
have
they're getting paid. So there are food handling permit
Okay.
requirements. There are business license requirements. There are still other things there. So this doesn't get them out of all of those.
okay.
And I would imagine if
something.
they're dumping liquid waste into the stormwater system, there's probably something in another section of city code that prohibits that as well.
Okay.
But I don't know that off the top of my head.
It is
And
sort of only F is kind of the one that saying where it complies.
I mean, one way to do it, if there were some that were really basic items that you want to make sure were covered, you could just say with the exception of,
Right.
Right.
and then you could say I and J and whatever. Very
And
simple.
catered events are, would catered events by definition be on someone's private property? Or does it become a public?
You could reserve Hopkins Green for an event
Mhm,
and then you provide the food.
mhm.
So that'd be a public property where it's a catered event.
Okay.
So, but if I had this birthday party for my child at which you're the taco vendor, you could run your generator loud enough to be plainly audible at a distance of 100 feet away, which would be, and I could put it 10 feet away from my property line, which would be 13 feet away from my next door neighbor.
Again, we didn't think about it to that detail, and that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we shouldn't in the future. But hopefully your event, as loud as it may be and as close as it may be, will only be for a relatively short period of time. Where the rest of this, if I'm the taco guy and I'm coming into town operating 3 days a week, 5 days a week, whatever it is, then all this applies. But the point is taken that maybe we do need to do a bit of a review
Yeah.
at some point in the future. on
So,
mobile
because
restaurants.
worst case scenario, I could have a lot of money. My kids could be in their 20s, which they are. And they could want to have a blowout that went for
Fancy.
24 hours
Yeah.
with no regulation.
Well, I mean, we have regulations on noise and so
Noise.
forth anyway.
Okay, so the noise ordinance would
Yeah, yeah.
kick in.
So there are little
Sure.
bits and pieces elsewhere that would apply, right?
Okay.
But getting back to the mobile restaurants specific to parks, and if we want to even consider how or if a food truck, trailer, or cart could operate in the public parks in open space or for a park and recreational area. So we using design standards exception. So if it is decided, if there's a desire to allow mobile restaurants to operate in Jordan's Point Park, just as an example of one of the city's parks, could amend the zoning ordinance to either amend the use matrix to permit mobile restaurants as a by right use or as a conditional use if you chose. And another option is amending the mobile restaurant use and design standards to provide an exemption to mobile restaurants operating in a city-owned park, similar to the exemption that's already provided for mobile restaurants operating in conjunction with a special event.
It seems like we should have a permit process, like you can't just pull into the pool if the pool doesn't want you there. Yes, I do like the idea of allowing them, but it seems like they have to go through the city to get a permit. So does that make it any different if you could operate if you have a permit?
So if we allowed, we can definitely begin a permit process for that to make sure that we're in control of when and or where this occurs
Right.
on the public property.
Like, we don't want them to go into the cemetery and sell food.
Yeah.
But if we had a permit process, maybe that takes care of it.
Mhm. Just for your knowledge, right now, they have to get inspected by the fire marshal before they can operate. That's the main thing that occurs right now. But was pointed out, there was one of the standards for mobile restaurants is in the area that we allow. We've never, as staff, have gone out and said, here's where mobile restaurants can operate in the C1, C2, or RLC zoning district. So the area hasn't been designated.
Yeah.
So all of that can be built into a permit process, where even in the permit process, we say no to cemeteries as an example, or only in these handful of public parks as we choose them, and maybe not in all of them. So yeah, it certainly could be developed.
I mean, does that make it any easier than trying to put it all in the ordinance for it? 'Cause I do like.
Well, I think
that.
we would still need sort of the allowance, and then we go do the permit process.
Right.
If it's even needed. Because as an example, the exemption, because we've had other, and I cannot think of the name of it wasn't Freedom Food Festival, Freedom whatever festival occurred in Brubaker, and they had 3 or 4 mobile restaurants, and those exemptions will still go forward. So on a more permanent basis, we have a vendor area, as an example, designated in Jordan's Point Park. Well, what does that mean? How are we going to control food service if it's by a mobile restaurant? Our specific, do we have to go through a process where we specifically enter into contracts? I'll leave that up to Jim and the attorney, or do we develop a permit process after we specifically allow it in the zoning ordinance? Or are we not at the point where we even need to really figure that out? Right now, it can still occur through a special event, but that's it. If we want anything beyond special event food truck, then we have to perhaps consider on how that would occur.
So right now at lunchtime, somebody could not park at Jordan's Point Park because it's not allowed in our use matrix.
Correct. And I think we provided you on the back of the mobile restaurant, the use matrix excerpt there with the restaurant mobile highlighted, and it's only a by right use in RLC C1 and C2. So they could not go to the Parks and Open Space zoning district and set up.
So and that includes like an ice cream truck as well.
Now, I got to be a little bit careful because ice cream truck was handled differently, and no definition. Thank you for bringing that up, because in the definition, that did come up also as part of the conversation when we were developing using design standards. So the definition for a mobile restaurant: a readily movable wheeled cart, trailer, or vehicle designed and equipped for the preparing, serving, and or selling of food and operated at temporary locations. This definition shall include food trucks, trailers, and food carts. Shall not apply to ice cream trucks. Yet ice cream truck typically operates differently in the sense that it's driving from place to place,
Right.
selling on the
Sells and
street,
leaves.
and leaves.
Right.
So, Arnie, if we could go back to your Jordan's point, if say council or private developer said, wouldn't it, I mean, an entrepreneur, wouldn't it be nice to have a mobile food truck at Jordan's Point this summer? And they'll operate June, July, and August or something. So what would apply in that case?
Last summer, Bither Outdoor, the kayak folks, had a contract. It went to council, and council approved that use there. And they also asked me at some point, I can't remember if it's before the summer started or during the summer, about food service, not necessarily a food truck. I think they were going to set up something just sort of and serve food. One, I don't think it was in their contract for the kayak, so the contract would have been amended. But it's possible that I could have considered that as an accessory use to what they were already doing for the kayak use, and they could have been allowed just as a accessory use to operate whatever limited food service they might have been contemplating. But it's still, I think, an improvement if you want to have that use, which is a mobile restaurant, allowed other than special events and other than as an accessory to some other function that's being allowed to occur in a public park, to expressly figure out how you want that to occur in the zoning.
Yeah, so it would be a standalone event. That's what.
Yeah, you could,
Yeah, it's not.
or a standalone event or, yeah.
Not event, but a standalone period, not, as you just said, not linked to a
Special event.
festival or a special event. So an entrepreneur says, I'd be willing to set up my food truck in Jordan's Point for a month. And the city, and then you'd have to go through a process with the city
To allow that,
to allow
either
that.
contract or not, I don't know, but at least, and then we can certainly develop that permit process where it would probably be coordinated both between Public Works Department and our planning department, because Public Works generally schedules what happens in the parks. The pavilion or pavilions now in Jordan's Point are scheduled. The soccer field, multi-use field is also scheduled. So there would have to be some coordination, but we could develop that permit process.
So if, just following that, then going back to then would the choice be to say it's either conditional or by right use in open space, and that would allow it to happen in the use matrix? Is that?
Correct. But do we want a food truck to go through a conditional use permit?
No.
You know, it's,
Yeah.
if we have standards already,
Yes. Good point.
then,
Yes.
but I did have to put in, you know, that's an option. So to allow it either
Okay.
as a by right or a conditional use, but thinking a little bit more about conditional use and having to come before you, and there's already a set of standards.
No, yeah, I agree.
I'm wondering about where we're talking about where these might be. So in other words, you're not bringing a food truck into Hopkins Green,
True.
right? And you're not bringing it into Fairwinds Park. You're not bringing it into the Taylor Street Park, right? The only places you could bring the truck into that would be parks and open spaces, I think, would be Brubaker and Jordan's Point. Is that right? Otherwise, you're on the street adjacent to, you know, if you want to park by Fairwinds and think, oh, there's about a bunch of families out there on Saturday afternoon playing with their kids, you know, they might want to buy tacos there, right? But the truck would not be in parks and open spaces. So all the other rules about where a food truck can be would apply there. You're not putting the truck in. Does that make sense? Am I?
Yes, but I think you can still pop the curb, and, you know, if you're on the street in Fairwinds, whatever one of the streets are around Fairwinds Park, you're serving the people in the park. So to me, that's, you're in the parks and open space at that point.
Right.
And then the other technical issue is the zoning district boundaries typically go to the middle of the street.
Okay.
So if
All
you're
right.
parked on that side of the street,
Okay,
closer
then
to
you're
the park,
in that.
technically you're in.
You're in that. Okay. All right. All right. That's good to know.
Are you
But did that answer?
No, no, I'm just wondering what we need to think about it, whether where.
But the other point was, where would we, and we started this, where would we want to allow it and where wouldn't we? And we could either develop use and design standards or figure out, yes, it's allowed as a by right use in parks and open space, but the use and design standards then specify, but only in X, Y, and Z parks.
Yeah.
And therefore it wouldn't be in all the others. So we have a mechanism of figuring out where, or it's just done in the permit process where the permit says these parks it's allowed, these parks it's not, along with all the other stuff that we would have in a permit process.
Like in the permit process more and more, and maybe it's just Brubaker and Jordan's Point, and it's up to staff to decide the length of the permit. Is it for the summer? Is it for certain hours? I think because it seems like it's difficult to treat as a zoning issue, because I don't think we want to allow it all the time without oversight.
And if you do the use and design standards, couldn't you, that's where you would say only in parks, because as you said earlier, there are some residences in park zones. Did I?
There may be.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay.
There won't be many, but I hate to say that there's zero, and I'm not sure of that.
Okay. Um,
I think we're not settling this one tonight, right?
Doesn't
So,
sound like it.
Um,
Are there any things that we should look into, research? You want us to develop a permit process? Or at least a draft version for consideration? Would that be helpful?
so I think it would be helpful to see what the permit process would look like versus if you fleshed out what what the other option is. So if we went with the conditional or by right, but then had these use and design standards. Sort of just to see them side by side to see what does make, because I'm like, well, what about Richardson Park? If
Mhm.
there were
Yeah.
if there were food trucks parked on the street or in the parking lot at Richardson Park, wouldn't that work? But you certainly wouldn't want them by the cemetery, as you said, Leslie. And I don't know about Woods Creek. Whether there would be anywhere there because you're in a school zone.
How about we bring something back to you that I think what I'm hearing is that it ends up being a by right use in the mobile restaurant becomes a by right use in parks and open space, but there will be additional use and design standards developed that sort of flushes out either reference to a permit process and we'll bring that, or in the use and design standards specifically, it fleshes out some of the things that we're talking about it only being in certain parks. And then we'll have to consider maybe hours of operation or other things, but certainly not in cemeteries and probably not in most of our other quote unquote smaller parks.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I get nervous even calling it by right in parks and open space,
But if it's not,
just kind of keeping it separated.
okay, so then maybe figuring out
Process.
how it is an accessory use, but that somebody would still, if they're looking maybe at the mobile restaurant use and design stand
Mhm.
now. Okay, I
But
can
how would
figure
it
that
be
one out.
how would it be an accessory use to a
Yeah,
park? Well, accessory to what?
accessory
Like
to
if
uses that are already
let's say
occurring.
Richardson, what would be the accessory?
And that's why I'm struggling a little bit because we don't have as well a defined accessory use list as other ordinances, as I mentioned previously.
Mm.
But it's an accessory to whatever is occurring already in the park,
What if it's just
like concession
a
stand.
day? It's a day at the park, just like
Yeah.
Saturday.
That's why it's a little bit more difficult on the fly for me to figure out how to allow it if it's not specifically a use in the use matrix, that has standards
Mhm.
that go with it that further limit that use.
Okay.
But I understand if we listed in the use matrix as a by right use, but then actually get into it, it only applies to like
Right.
this little thing over here. Not the little thing, those are our two bigger parks, but yeah, it's a little bit maybe deceiving.
Mhm.
Maybe that's not the right word, but misleading to some degree.
Mhm.
I just grabbed, just because I was trying to understand it more, so I just was looking on the internet. And anyway, I found Fairfax County. So they have use standards for food trucks. Only maximum 4 hours in any one day on any location. Anyway, I'm sure there's good examples, and I think giving you a chance to look at other places.
But we already have that in for the food truck,
is
like
in there
hours
already.
and whatnot. So
Yeah.
is there anything specific in the Fairfax that has to do with parks?
No, that they're permitted uses in industrial districts, commercial districts, commercial areas of planned districts. They're an accessory use on a construction site with an active building permit. Residentially zoned properties with non-residential uses such as community pools, food trucks are permitted as an accessory use up to 12 times per calendar year. may be associated with a use like farmer's market that is separately approved by administrative permit. Maybe that. And then then the rest is already covered. Yep.
Just going back, I guess, to the original question, is there still a desire to figure something out for food trucks in parks?
So,
Okay,
think
it's
so.
not
I
like
mean,
concessions
yeah.
where we're just gonna,
Possessions, yes, I think that's
I
not a
guess the
problem.
point is, going back to the, well, I could ask John to do this one. And we want to encourage them, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's, so we're trying to figure out how to encourage them, but not make it complicated.
Right.
And have some regulation.
Okay,
we'll bring something back then.
okay, good. All right, thanks. I think we we just blended 1 and 3 there, and I'm assuming public comment open, public comment closed. So we just took the whole thing, staff report, into comment discussion. I think that's all right. Matt would get mad maybe because I don't know if we did it properly, but okay, so that then brings us to other business, zoning and planning report. Barney has something.
Nothing for the zoning and planning report, but I do have something for major project update.
Okay, so with that, A is taken care of, so we go on to B.
In the major projects, just to make you aware, WNL submitted a revised site plan for the Lindley Student Health Center. It's not quite exactly the right name, but to explain the process, site plans are a little bit different in the sense that they are a ministerial use or approval, and we don't bring them to you until they actually meet all the requirements. So all the other applications that you have for rezones, conditional use permits, they submit an application. It's a complete application and we bring it to you for your consideration. But since it's a ministerial use, which means if it meets all the requirements, you should be approving them. We go through a number of iterations. They submitted a site plan with a number of details. We send it out to our design review team, people or departments that are on that team, or building official, myself, fire marshal, public works, and the police department. So they take a review. We give them a certain amount of time, and normally it's 2 weeks. They have comments back. We present those comments to the applicant, WNL in this case, and they revise their site plan accordingly. And then we send that back out. So that's where we are now. We send it back out to the design review team. Tomorrow, I think, is the deadline. But just to make you aware that we are in the process of going through at least the second review of the Lindley Center site plan. And that may be ready for the next meeting, or it may not be, depending on if anything else is found that needs further revision.
Okay.
Then the second item, just to be aware of, is we, through sheer dumb luck, found that the courthouse conditional use permit, so 15 years ago, the old courthouse downtown had a conditional use permit approved that required a renewal after 15 years. Because we're now hoping desperately to move out of our building at some point in the future because it's going to be renovated, we are going through the old files and starting to scan them in and trying to lessen our load of things that we needed to transfer with us. And the first box that Kate happened to grab with conditional use permits, and we found that there is a deadline looming quickly. And we've been in contact with the owner, and they are in the process of submitting an application to renew the conditional use permit for the courthouse downtown. And it's not the whole courthouse building, it's just the public areas. So it will only apply to that room at the back that can be utilized by other folks. So the public assembly portion of it. So it's not all the other offices for WNL that happen to be in the courthouse building. But just to make you aware that those are the two and maybe that's not a major project, but that's another item that may be on your next agenda.
And on that, then it would never have to be renewed again because we've changed our rules on CUP. Okay.
Yeah, that's the thing I didn't mention is there are mechanisms already in place. If you're in violation of the conditions that were approved in your CUP, we have mechanisms in our code to deny or end your conditional use permit. So there's really no good reason. And this came up when we had all those renewals for large capacity houses. So since I've been on, we've recommended that the renewals not be put in place anymore. So that condition would go away. So the approval could be for a conditional use permit and in perpetuity, as long as they abide by the conditions.
And how do we, so at one point, do we review that? I mean, does that come before commission?
There'll be a new conditional use permit application, and I guess is what my point is. They're going to have to resubmit for their renewal, which is the same as anything else you see for a conditional use permit. So that's in the hopper, or it's on the way.
And who would be the applicant? Who's the owner?
Adamson Development. They actually have a different LLC for that one,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken,
Right.
but it's Adamson's.
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. So that would bring us then to city council report.
We met last Thursday. We had a lively meeting. We had a presentation from the mounted unit board, the horses for the police department, and Gladys on that committee, and it was very nice to hear from that board. Then we had a public hearing on our ordinance. Oh, wait. Yes, the ordinance for the zoning amendment for the ADUs, and that passed 4-2. The only hangup was on number of people. We spent a lot of time debating whether you should allow 4 people, family of 4 or 2 people. We ended up just keeping the ordinance like we had it. And many thanks to Arnie and Kate and Planning Commission for all the time y'all spent on it. Everybody was quite impressed of how in the weeds we got up here and with the ordinance that we came up with. And then we did talk about a draft policy on government speech from city-owned light posts. And that started with a request from Main Street. They're working on a project with tourism on doing wayfinding and about putting that on the light posts. And then it got balled up with the flags as well. And we looked at a draft ordinance, and at this point, council has decided to table that indefinitely. So there'll be no changes on that. And then I did mention to y'all last time too about the Senate Bill 304 on ADUs, and it went to a House subcommittee today to be reviewed. And sorry. And actually, Virginia First Cities and Virginia Municipal League used our ordinance as an example, and they've been talking about our ordinance to the patron of the bill in the subcommittee, looking at it, saying, Lexington spent all this time on it. It's appropriate for their locality. What works in rural Virginia doesn't necessarily work in Northern Virginia, and because they're trying to set rules that they think are fair, that might work in Northern Virginia, but probably wouldn't work here. And like a couple of the things that I think I had told you before, we would, if it passes as it is now, we would not allow to use a conditional use permit. So one of the things we've been, talking to them about is, well, we actually are getting more. We have the potential to have more ADUs by using the conditional use permit, because we allow non-conforming structures to apply to be an ADU. And if we couldn't do that through a conditional use permit, I don't think we could do it. They couldn't violate. I don't know, we'd have a way of approving that. And then also that we're allowing ADUs in residential neighborhoods that currently don't allow 2-family dwellings. So it is right to make, if you're making that big of a change, that neighbor should be able to have an opportunity to comment on it. And the other part that's strange is they require the setbacks can't be any more than the primary dwelling or of an accessory building. And so for us, an accessory building is like a shed, which has a rear setback of 5 feet. And we spent all that time talking about, let's not regulate how much has to be, say, for green space. We'll set our setback. And so you can plant trees and things like that, and you have a buffer between the neighbors. So anyway, pointing out those things. Today, the subcommittee met on it, and they passed by for the day on the bill, which means they weren't ready to act on it. The word from the committee is they feel like there needs to be an ADU ordinance, and whether it's this year or next year, at some point it'll happen. Hopefully they will send it to be studied by the Housing Commission. But we don't know yet if they'll come back. There were a couple of last minute amendments that were made, but nothing that would really affect us. So it's still ongoing drama. But it was nice to hear that they too were impressed with our ordinance.
Mhm.
So.
Good.
And
So-
we're ahead the curve. I didn't realize how much ahead of the curve. You know, other groups do have, other localities have ordinances, but not a lot.
Does that mean that ours goes into effect until there's any change?
Yes,
Yeah.
right. And in the way the bill is drafted right now, everything would be fine until, I think, until 2025.
And yesterday I stopped in to see Arnie and we talked about, because I listened to the commission audio on that discussion. And so one question came up about, well, how many, the one that we normally hear among ourselves or council. Well, let's put this in perspective. How many will we have? And so the question came up about chickens and how many chickens. So I asked Arnie about that. And so when I heard that, it made me think, yeah, that maybe because we have a baseline or somehow we keep track, and so that we know how many have come through and it's reported to council and commission just in a routine way. Well, we had 6 ADUs this year, or so, but now we have a baseline. We know where we are, and then we can begin to understand. Because I think part of the other discussion that council had, and we had it too, is that, and you mentioned it, Leslie, is that we may eventually, our goal is some of this would go to, would be by right in the future. So I'm just suggesting a way to monitor it. I don't think it's a big deal to monitor.
Well, it's going to have to come through us anyway, because it's a
Yeah,
conditional use
right,
permit,
yeah.
both us and council. So we will definitely know how many.
Well, all right.
Sorry, that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you very much. And unless you all want to sit here this rest of the evening in amiable silence,
I move that we adjourn. I second.
all in favor?